Hello everyone. In today's case, a long-haul truck driver from Canada would make his final trip back home through the US, but would disappear after stopping at a casino in Nevada. What happened to the 28-year-old is a complete mystery after that. Trevor Angell was born October 4th of 1971 to Pat and Jim, long-haul truck drivers. In the year 2000, Trevor was 28 years old and lived in Cold Lake, Alberta, a small city named after the lake nearby, near the border of Saskatchewan and 314 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. Trevor would go on to marry his high school sweetheart named Teresa, and the two would be overjoyed when they would eventually welcome their first son. Trevor was known not to make the best decisions in life. He was said to be spontaneous and was the type of person who would do things without thinking about the long-term consequences. He also had friends his wife considered shady and was easily turned on by schemes that made quick, easy money. Despite that, he'd followed in his parents' footsteps and settled into a career of long-haul truck driving for Cool Transport. But having a family now, having his son in the picture, Trevor was more determined than ever to get out of the truck driving industry and to find a job that was closer to home that would allow him to spend nights at home every single day, the normal 9 to 5. The family had recently sold their home in Calgary and relocated to Cold Lake, where they were renting an apartment there in hopes of starting an easier, more laid-back lifestyle for the family. Trevor had also recently started seeing a psychologist that his work had hired and had been speaking with a specialist about how he didn't know what he wanted to do with life, and he had also recently hinted that he needed a bodyguard, which was concerning. On September 20th of 2000, Trevor would set off to do what he'd hoped to be his final long-haul truck drive from Canada to the US. He had been scheduled to drive a load of meat from Calgary to Los Angeles and then return with a load of bananas. Earlier that day, Trevor made the drive from his home in Cold Lake to Brooks, a city southeast of Calgary. Around noon, Trevor arrived at a meat packing plant and picked up a load of beef. He then made the 25-hour drive from Calgary to Los Angeles that he'd done many times before. He was said to be very familiar with this route, and he would actually arrive the very next day on very little sleep on September 21st. After dropping off the load of meat and then picking up the load of bananas, Trevor headed back in the direction of home. And around 4 hours later, Trevor would make it to the town of Primm, Nevada, a town just across the border of California. Now, Trevor very often stopped at this town on his way home because Primm housed a hotel and casino called Whiskey Pete's, which was just off Interstate 15. So it was a very convenient place for truckers to stop during their trips. He was also known to gamble and drink, so the stop wasn't out of the ordinary for him during his return trips. Trevor would first stop at a gas station in Primm to fill up his truck, and then he would pull the 18-wheeler into the large parking lot at Whiskey Pete's. On September 22nd, around 10 a.m., Trevor would speak to one of the dispatchers at Cool Transport to let them know that he was going to be resting there for a bit before returning to his trip back to Calgary. Sometime after this phone call, he spoke to his wife Teresa on the phone, where he told her that he hadn't slept in 4 days. Teresa urged him to sleep before his drive back to Canada, and then he ended up telling her that this was going to be his final trip, or he'd have at least one more trip where he'd have to go back and forth before he was going to quit the industry for good. After ending the call, both Teresa and the dispatchers assumed that Trevor was going to go and rest before he continued back to Canada. However, witnesses would report differently. Between September 22nd, when he was making all those phone calls and being very active, to around 4 a.m. on September 23rd, Trevor's ATM card would be used 9 times to withdraw money from his bank account that would result in his entire paycheck being taken out. Around 10 a.m. on September 23rd, a waitress named Susanna would report serving Trevor at the restaurant at Whiskey Pete's. He was said to have ordered oatmeal and then paid for the bill and the tip using pocket change. There was also reports of him possibly gambling inside the casino, although I've never seen any video footage of him doing so, and I don't know if back then they just didn't have as many cameras inside casinos, but you'd think they would. But if you know, let me know. Now, this is where things get concerning, because there were other witnesses that would report possibly seeing who they thought was Trevor in the parking lot of Whiskey Pete's, clutching his stomach, seeming disoriented, and lying on the ground asking for help. Now, it seems to be unclear if that person was ever, 100% identified as being Trevor, but the worst part of this was no one seemed to help this individual who was, laying on the ground in distress asking for help, and no one seemed to call for help either. As the day went on, Cool Transport continued to try to contact Trevor, however, they got no response. Eventually, they grew worried and began to contact his wife and parents, letting them know that no one had heard from Trevor. He was completely radio silent. Using GPS tracking on the truck, his company was able to determine that the 18-wheeler was still sitting in Primm. They were also able to determine that it hadn't moved in nearly 24 hours. After this, Kulak's transport would end up calling the Calgary police and reporting him missing. But it's unclear if the police really did anything in those initial days, because it wouldn't be until fellow truck drivers arrived in Prim 3 days later that they were the ones to discover and investigate his truck still sitting in the Whiskey Pete's parking lot. Inside the back of the truck, the load of bananas was still sitting perfectly untouched. However, the refrigerator had ran out of fuel and had turned off. Inside the cab, Trevor's wallet, his driver's license, and credit cards were all found inside, but no cash was left in his wallet. Now, I've seen some mixed reports. I've seen both his wife and parents, and then I've also just seen his parents mentioned. But either way, I know for sure that his parents flew to Nevada to help aid in the search. Now, in the initial days, people were really hopeful that Trevor would be found. There was this hope that he had just been so unsatisfied with the truck driving industry that he had decided to go drink his sorrows away, he was gambling somewhere, and that he would eventually be found somewhere. Because Jim and Pat were both truck drivers themselves, they also knew Whiskey Pete's very well and had stopped there themselves before on their trips. His parents were actually the ones to speak to the waitress and get that information, and they were also the ones to figure out that there was witnesses that might have spotted him in the parking lot distressed. But after a thorough search of Whiskey Pete's, Trevor was nowhere to be found there. This led his family to wonder if maybe he had decided to try his luck at one of the other casinos in Prim and that he just hadn't returned back yet. Another theory was that he'd possibly gambled all his money away, and so now he was just wandering around, possibly in the desert, with no money and in a bad headspace. His family would end up going ahead and renting a car in Nevada so that they could drive around and continue to search for him on their own. They also continued to show his picture around the casino and the town in hopes that, someone would recognize him, someone would have a tip that would lead to finding him. However, being a casino, there was hundreds, if not thousands of people in and out of that place every single day. And especially as the days were passing, this was, 3+ days later, by the time that, his family was there looking for him, the chances of someone remembering specifically his face were extremely slim, considering how many faces, the waitresses and the casino staff seen every day. It's not like he was, a local there where he might have been sitting at the same, poker table every single day or at the same slot machine or gone to the restaurant frequently. Yes, he did go to this place quite often, but he didn't live there, so I'm sure that he was just another face in the crowd, sadly. Now, after hearing about the sighting in the parking lot, his parents began calling around to hospitals and medical clinics and even the jail, just trying to see if possibly he had been taken to one of those places and was just a John Doe sitting there waiting. They also tried contacting the Salvation Army in hopes that maybe he had sought shelter after losing all his money and was now wandering around homeless, but that also was an empty lead. And that information about the guy asking for help in the parking lot seemed to really stick with his family, because his parents would end up driving through the night in the rough desert roads, following lights from drilling sites as they called out his name and feared that maybe he'd wandered into the desert and succumbed to the elements. Pat saying, quote, "We did scary things. We were told we'd get shot because there were diamond mines out there. You do anything when you're looking for someone. It always seems like we run up against brick walls. I did everything I could. I kept writing and phoning people. It just fizzled right out. I've had people ask what's worse, the death or the missing. The missing is a little easier because you have hope. If you have no hope, that's the hardest." End quote. Pat would end up coming across an ad in the local newspaper for a private detective in the area, so they ended up hiring that person. The PI would end up tracking down and contacting Trevor's company, as well as the truck drivers who had gone to the casino and went through his truck and then taken the 18-wheeler from the scene, because I guess the company wanted that back. However, the company no longer wanted to participate, because now from the company's viewpoint, this was a family matter and that Trevor had a gambling problem and he was probably just out there somewhere and was neglectful and, didn't bring the truck back. So essentially, it seemed like they basically were just like, he's fired, it's over with, we don't want any contact with anyone anymore, we want nothing to do with this. Which is honestly so disheartening, because basically the crime scene was destroyed then if this is what happened. Again, I didn't find anything about the police going there, going through his truck, taking photos, trying to actually investigate this properly. Let me know if I'm wrong, but that's just what it seems like from all of the articles online. And then on top of that, it seems like the truck drivers from his company went there and just went through things and took it. What if there had been evidence in there that could lead to trying to find him? By October 4th, Pat and Jim would finally fly back to Canada with no answers. And it truly seemed as if Trevor had vanished in the thin air. And despite the family's desperate attempts for answers, the police seem just as unhelpful. Police seem to have gone down the route that Trevor had been unhappy with his life in Canada and that he had decided to run away and have a fresh start in America. Which I guess if you just take a quick initial look at this, it could be plausible. He was unhappy with his job. He was seeing a psychologist because he was just so unsure about what he wanted to do in his life. But it was a lot deeper than that. All the money was drained from his bank account, which it would be very curious if it was specifically him doing that. Is there actual footage of him at the ATM taking the money out, or could someone have been persuading him to? We don't know. That's the thing. It does make sense. He's at a casino. He drained his whole bank account gambling. Is what it is. Cut and dry. But then are there other possibilities to that? There could be. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police would say, quote, "It's not going anywhere. I think Trevor Angell is still out there. I don't think he's in distress or someplace where he can't defend himself or speak for himself. I think it's his choice to fall off the earth in America. I suspect he's still out there somewhere walking and talking, just for whatever reason, not interested in talking to his family. We get a lot of that. I'm sure everybody does. I don't have any evidence to show that, but when you do this enough, you get a pretty good feel of how people behave." End quote. Now, the police making that statement left me with a lot of questions because Trevor wasn't an American citizen. You'd think that they'd be more concerned with him overstaying his visa in the United States, overstaying his welcome there. Canadians are only allowed to stay in the US for, at least nowadays, about 6 months out of a year. I don't know if things were just different because this happened in the 2000s. They were less strict. But the fact that the police were just so nonchalant, yeah, he came here to just start a new life. But the thing was, how would he start a new life in the US? He wasn't an American citizen. He didn't have a social security number. He didn't have an American driver's license or American IDs. How would he, buy a house or get a job? He couldn't do any of those normal things. And also, it seems like he drained all the money from his bank account. So did they just think he was wandering around homeless and didn't care? I don't know. But it is just strange to me that the police there were just like, whatever. I don't know. I could understand more so if this was an American citizen in America or a Canadian citizen in Canada, but this is a foreign citizen in your country and you're just like, whatever. He's just staying here. It's fine. But I think that kind of just overall sums up how the police were looking at this. They seem to not know Trevor at all. They seem to just be making assumptions. And I don't think that's what the police should be doing. Because despite him being unhappy with work and, possibly having a gambling and a drinking problem, there was absolutely no signs from everything that we know that Trevor was unhappy in his marriage. On top of that, he was extremely excited to be a father. The main reason he wanted to quit truck driving and that he relocated his family out of the city to a more, rural small town was so that he could be there with them. Everything he was doing was for them. So why would someone who wanted to be a family man that wanted to be there for his family more to the point that he was going to quit his career to start fresh, just completely run out on them and disappear? To his family, it made zero sense that Trevor would just run away and abandon all of them without even a note. It made no sense that he would just go start a new life in the United States with no means to do so there. In 2005, Trevor's case would be featured on America's Most Wanted. There was tons of rumors, but none of them would ever pan out. There were also a lot of psychic sightings and tips that placed Trevor anywhere from Leduc to the beaches of Acapulco. His DNA would also be submitted to a national database for unidentified human remains in hopes that there would be a match there. Despite decades now passing, Trevor's family still wants answers and they still want to find him. Teresa didn't want to believe that Trevor would ever willingly abandon her and their son. She held out hope that he would return home. She even bought their son a dog named Dude as a coping mechanism. But as time would pass, Teresa would finally move on with her life. A few years later, Teresa would remarry, and that man would end up legally adopting her and Trevor's son. But Teresa has always kept her phone number the same in case Trevor was ever able to contact them again. Back in 2014, Trevor's son had finally grown up. He had gotten his learner's permit, and he had dreams of becoming a firefighter. Teresa saying, quote, "Trevor was my first love. He'll always have a special place in my heart. I just got to the point where I knew my son deserved a normal life. He bears quite a resemblance. He has the same kind of smile. He has the same eyebrows and the same build. I've also never changed my phone number. I don't want to be blamed for not getting the information. I'd never be able to live with that. I guess I'm still hoping for that miracle, divine intervention, but there's nothing more I can do." End quote. Trevor's aging parents were still searching for him back in 2013 to 2014, according to articles. A 2-part article series was also written in the Red Deer Express about his disappearance in hopes of spreading the word. But it's now been 24 years since Trevor's disappeared, and his loved ones still have no answers. So what do you think? What happened to Trevor is definitely a strange mystery. It does appear that Trevor had some addictive issues with both gambling and drinking, and he also seemed to often push his body to the limits when it came to his truck driving. He didn't sleep for days. It's something that's quite common with truck drivers. Not sleeping, possibly doing drugs to stay awake. So is it possible that Trevor could have been taking substances to stay awake? Maybe he bought something from someone and had a bad reaction, and that was him in the parking lot. But I didn't see any evidence anywhere that he was taking substances. And if he had OD'd in the parking lot, why wasn't he found? On top of that, why didn't anyone call for help for the person who was in the parking lot or go and help that person? I'm sure this wouldn't be the first time that someone either had alcohol poisoning or OD'd possibly at a casino. So why wasn't he located if that's something that happened? Was it him who withdrew all that money? Is there evidence of that? Did the police ever do anything to try to get any of this evidence? It's the question I have. Was this the first time that Trevor ever gambled all his money away like that from his family's bank account? Or was this the first time that something like that has happened, where all the money was drained? And considering how much he seemed to love his wife and son to the points of everything that he had done for them, would he have gone to the extremes of unaliving himself over gambling the money away? All of that makes me wonder, is it as simple as the police seem to think it is, that he just decided to wander off and start a new life, or that he wandered off and unalived himself because he had gambled all the money away? Or was there foul play involved here? If it was Trevor in the parking lot, could someone have taken advantage of his vulnerable state possibly and his lack of sleep and done something with him, taken him somewhere with bad intentions? Could he have gone to a hotel room possibly in the casino and something happened to him in one of the hotel rooms? I doubt every single hotel room was checked in that casino. Or could he have simply been just so out of it from lack of sleep and drinking and just being maybe overall upset about his gambling that he wandered into the desert and died of the elements? Or, again, is he just somewhere out there still and he's putting all of his family through this agony? We've definitely seen cases where that has happened before, so it's always a possibility, but it's just weird to me that he seemed to have all these goals and these things that he was going towards. I think another thing that's very interesting to note is that he had made a comment to his therapist that he may need a bodyguard. So could he have gotten himself involved in something dangerous in Nevada during those initial days there and something happened to him? Did he see something he wasn't supposed to? It was noted that Trevor was very easily influenced into making bad decisions. So could he have gambled all his money away? Someone noticed that and offered for him to do something, and in desperation, he took that offer, and that led to a very bad place. I think there's a lot of possibilities with this one, which is what makes it such a big mystery, which I think is also why it hasn't been solved in 24 years. I think also a big part of that is that this case didn't seem to be properly investigated, unless, again, there's just information out there or just a lot of information the police haven't let out. But it kind of seems like there isn't. Usually in US cases, there is a lot of information about the investigation, but I couldn't even find any information about ground searches being done or helicopters being brought out. I could be wrong. It could be out there and I didn't find it, or it's just not as easily accessible and it did happen. But if you do know, let me know, because I'm very curious. It really seems like his family flew there and they were the ones that did the brunt of the investigating. And the police were basically just like, nah, he's just out there making a new family. But again, what do you all think? Let me know down below in the comment section. I'll be down there chatting with you all. But before we go, let's take one more good look at Trevor, because there seems to be a possibility, according to police, that he could still be out there. Trevor Angell was 28 years old when he went missing in 2000. He has hazel eyes and brown hair, and at the time of his disappearance stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed about 165 pounds. His left ear was pierced, and he may have a mustache, beard, or goatee. He would now be in his 50s. My heart goes out to this family. I truly hope they get answers. Trevor's son also deserves answers to know what happened to his father. He was so young when his dad disappeared. But as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.